Chapter 21, The Final Court Battle. November 28, 2001 to August 28, 2007. The battle to clear Stephen Truscott's name began with a 1-2 punch. First was the documentary on the Fifth Estate. A year later came the publication of yet another book. This one, Until You Are Dead, by Julian Scher of the Fifth Estate staff, added to the argument that Steve was innocent and the miscarriage of justice had to be made right. The book and the television show brought the case back into public prominence, this time captivating people who had not been born when Steve and Lynn took that fateful bicycle ride. James Lockyer and AIDWYC worked on the case. In 2001, they appealed to the government to have the case reopened. A new trial would have freed Steve Truscott. The night before the decision came out, said Marlene Truscott, I told Steve that I firmly believed that this was to be the last night he would go to sleep as a convicted murderer. More than 100 well-wishers had gathered at the Truscott home the day the decision arrived. Steve received a phone call. The room went silent. But when Steve turned to his family and guests, the look on his face told the story. Instead of a new trial, Justice Minister Coulter had referred the case to retired Judge Fred Kaufman for review. Marlene later wrote, We must now face another bump in the road, as my husband stated. It will involve more time and more expense, but hopefully will be worth it in the end. Steve Truscott had now been battling for justice for 44 years. It took 2 years before Kaufman's report was completed, another 6 months before an appeal by the Ontario Court of Appeal was ordered, and a further 10 months before the Kaufman report was released to the public. In his report, Justice Kaufman said that the new evidence presented by AIDWYC cast doubt on Truscott's conviction, but it was not sufficient to pronounce him innocent. However, viewing the evidence cumulatively, there is clearly a reasonable basis for concluding that a miscarriage of justice, as earlier defined, likely occurred. This was Kaufman's way of saying Truscott was likely wrongfully convicted. Justice works slowly. In April 2006, Lynn Harper's body was exhumed. In other cases of wrongful conviction, DNA had been a clincher. DNA, dextrobolonic acid, is a genetic marker. It is found in blood, saliva, and semen. The hope was that even after all these years, they would find traces to show Steve could not be the rapist and murderer. But no DNA remained. The exhumation provided nothing to help Steve. Over a period of another year and a half, the Ontario Court of Appeal summoned witnesses and reviewed all new evidence. As before, experts argued the time of death. This time, though, the defense team unearthed 3 different copies of Dr. Peniston's original autopsy report. Dr. Peniston himself, they found, had on his own initiative undertaken an agonizing reappraisal of the time of death as far back as 1966. This helped explain why he had not appeared as an expert in the Supreme Court review. The death, Dr. Peniston had concluded, could have been 4 or more hours later than the narrow 7:15 to 7:45 p.m. window he had given originally. The key witness who saw Truscott on the bridge, Dougie Oates, repeated his story, that he had been within a few feet of Lynn and Steve as they crossed the bridge. He had been hunting turtles, and Karen Dom, now Karen Jitsi. From Ontario archive files, defense lawyers found Karen's original statement to police. In 1959, she had told police that she, too, had seen the pair cross the bridge. Later, she said the police had tried to persuade her 3 times to change her story about where she had seen them. Additional documents, including original statements to police and case notes by OPP investigators, all supported Truscott's innocence. Finally, on August 28, 2007, the court delivered a decision. This time, Steve was on Highway 401 when he took a call from his lawyer on his son's cell phone. You are free. No more parole. You've been acquitted by the court. I will never forget the weight being lifted from my shoulders, Steve wrote later. It is hard to explain the feeling of relief after 46 years of bearing the wrongful conviction, and then suddenly, in a moment's time, it is all over. After 47 years, 11 months, and 2 days, he was free at last. A few months later, the Ontario government officially acknowledged the miscarriage of justice that had taken away a man's life for almost half a century. The government awarded him $6.5 million in compensation. Chapter 22. Who Killed Lynn Harper? One question remains. Who did kill Lynn Harper? Even if a killer were found 52 years later, the evidence necessary for a trial is no longer available. Witnesses have died. Physical evidence, what little there was, has been destroyed. Any answers are now little more than guesses. Over the years, a number of possibilities have been raised. The Fifth Estate puts Air Force Sergeant Alexander Kaluchek high on the list. Others have named 2 brothers and a friend who were painting in the area that day, or an airman who was later accused of trying to rape his own daughter in the woods. The neat pile of clothing near the body suggests another possibility. Could the killer have been a ranking official on the airbase, someone who took part in the search for that body, and stayed near the murder scene until the body was removed? The killer could have been encouraged another officer to have the body covered with jackets, ensuring a contaminated scene in case he was later linked to the killings. Perhaps it was the killer himself who kept nudging police to see only Steve Truscott as a suspect. Unfortunately, we will never know.